Well, hi there, everybody. Welcome to another conversation stream. And my guest tonight, I am very, very pleased to welcome somebody who we've only actually met in person once, and we've sort of like waved at each other on social media here and there over the last couple of years. But I am joined by Dr. Juhem Navarro-Rivera. Thank you for coming. How are you this evening?
I am doing great. Waiting for the snow that is not coming yet. Uh,
Are you pro or anti snow?
uh, I mean, I live in New England for so long that I'm
Ah,
indifferent. uh,
Yeah. I
Here
was
in
about
Maryland, it's like
yeah,
indifferent now.
yeah. I
My
don't
kid
know.
likes it, so now I'm getting a new enjoyment of it. But
I can kind of understand that. See, I don't have kids, and it's just me. So I when I was younger, I didn't mind it, and like if it was like a day off school or something when I was a kid. Now, if I never see another snowflake for the rest of my life, I'll be so happy. Like it's and it's weird because like I work from home, so I don't have to go anywhere. Like it's not like the snow inconveniences me in any way.
yeah,
I'm just miserable. I'm just a miserable bastard, and I don't want people to have fun. And and
yeah.
that
No, in my case, I had to shovel so many times. That even like the snow here in the DC Metro, it doesn't bother me. Like you don't have to like in the last like I don't know how many years that I've been almost a decade here. Like
yeah,
I think my first winter in Connecticut, I had to shovel more snow than all the snow that I have shoveled nearly 10 years in here. So
yeah.
it's
It could be worse. I mean,
yeah,
I totally admit that. And I have like my friends who live up up north in New England or live in Minnesota. Like whenever I complain about the snow we get, I'm very careful to try not to do that because they're like, oh yeah, you've got it real bad.
yeah,
You know, would you get one snowfall last year? Ooh, you know. So, but anyway,
yeah.
once again, thank you for joining me. And on the conversation streams, we always like um, to make them fundraisers for particular charities, and appropriately enough, given the nature of your work and your own association with the organization,
Yeah.
you have chosen the American Humanist Association, which I was delighted by because it is the only uh, atheist or atheistic organization that I still belong to and contribute to. So I'm very happy
Well,
to help out
good
the
to know
AHA.
that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been serving on the board for I think this is my second full year. Actually, my third full year.
Hmm.
And yeah, and you know, I've been a member for a while now, like probably 6, 7 years now.
Hmm.
And you know, I really enjoy the organization, enjoy the people who are there, and you know, it's one of the aside from professional organizations that I kind of belong, it's the one that I've like stuck the longest with, mostly because I do believe in the mission and I do believe in the work,
Yeah.
and it's a fantastic organization, and I hope that with this boom of the non-religious coming up, we do get a little bit expanded.
Yeah, I would like that. I would very much like for the AHA and other sort of similarly oriented organizations to be a lot more influential and have a lot more sort of pull and weight in the community, in the secular community. Um, because yeah, I like it was like there's as and we'll probably talk about this a little bit as we go on, but as you are aware, there are certain corners of the atheist secular community that are a little toxic, just a little bit. And the when I found the AHA, it was like this lovely oasis of seemingly mostly just decent people trying to make the world a better place. And it was like, oh, how nice. This is so nice. Um so anybody
Well,
who
no,
was,
I
yeah, go ahead.
appreciate your support and
Yeah.
thank you very much for being a member.
Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to. And so, anybody who is watching who wants to donate to the AHA or become a member or support the organization, the address is on your screen right now. It's AmericanHumanist.org, and it's also linked in the description. of the video. So we would both encourage you to support the American Humanist Association. They're a really, really terrific organization that do a lot of good work for the secular community specifically, and trying to sort of help to drag everything forward, secular community and beyond. It's a really good organization. So before we get into it, I think I want our main topic of discussion to be about the Secular Voices survey that you authored and that came out last year. But before we get to that, I just wanted to ask, like, what's a nice guy like you doing in a community like this? Is basically what I'm asking. Like, what is it about secularism and that particular sort of focus of research that drew you to it?
Yeah, so I was in grad school, well, like about 15 years ago or so, when I went back to do my PhD, and I was interested in doing religion and politics. While I was in college, I went to at the University of Puerto Rico, which is actually the sweater I have right now. Coincidentally, wasn't. And I was really interested in religion and politics. I went to a Catholic high school growing up, a fantastic school. Like, I have no complaints about it. But I was kind of like not the openly atheist kid, because I didn't really know what it was, atheism or anything like that. But certainly a person who wasn't very pleased with priests and organized religion to begin with. And once I was in college and started learning more about different philosophies, and I got really interested in religion and politics. But we didn't have a religion department at the University of Puerto Rico, so I just had to take all the courses that I could find about religion in the school, whether it was in the history department or there was 2 courses in political science that I took that were tangentially related. I was never able to take the New Testament one because my course load like didn't allow me. I was like, yeah, that was a stretch. If I didn't want to graduate in 4 years, like to put on more credits in there. So I needed to graduate in 4 years, so I didn't push it. But then I went to grad school, and in political science, I think there's a lot of change that has happened in recent years. More people, I think, with the power that the Christian right has amassed, like really taking it more seriously now. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was mostly religious scholars of religion looking at it and taking a lot of, and a lot of course has to do with conservatism, and I think taking it at face value, much of the moral majority kind of claims and stuff like that, we're really interested in being pro-life, and I had a more skeptical take on it, and because there was no experts on religion in my department, I think I was dissuaded from actually taking that line of inquiry. But then in 2007, Trinity College, which is down the road in Hartford, Connecticut, I went to the University of Connecticut in Stores, had this Institute for the Study of Secularism in Society and Culture. And they were looking for a research fellow who was a number cruncher, interested in religion and secularism. And so I applied, and I got it. So that's how I ended up now, as I call myself, the Forrest Gump of secularism. I've basically been involved, or secular studies. Like, I've been involved in probably every major secular study that has been out there that is quantitative, like kind of surveys, mostly by virtue of landing in there. And so we landed, we released in 2009 the 2008 American Religious Identification Survey, which was the one that showed that, people with no religious affiliation was increasing. And that's how I discovered the movement, because at that point, so I started getting requests from American Atheists, from AHA, from CFI, about like, more interest in these numbers. So that's how I discovered a movement. Before that, I only was kind of like interested more in the church and state stuff. So I knew about Americans United for separation of church and state, but not beyond that. And Americans United is not really a fully secular organization. It's like was founded by Protestant clergy,
Right.
and now it has Rachel Lasser, who is their first Jewish executive director. But I read a lot of who is now my fellow board member, Rob Boston at AHA, who I think still runs the magazine of Americans United, but is a senior like communications person in there. And so that's how I ended up in secular studies. Like, I get this gig, and after that, like I had to do my dissertation on another topic because I wasn't allowed to do the religion dissertation. So my dissertation is about Latinx politics, which was another subject I was writing a lot in those days. But my passion has always been, this non-religious angle, and not necessarily just looking at atheism, but also looking at different ways in which people don't practice religion, and particularly the political aspect of it. Because there's a lot of, I've worked with a lot of sociologists who look at it, and philosophers like Tony Bean, or sociologists like Barry Cosmin or Ryan Cragen, or Joseph Blankholm, but not really, there's not many political scientists looking at this. And I'm not even sure if they're openly atheists, other than me, political scientists are out there. I mean, I know a lot of political scientists, and I have some that I suspect they're one of us, but I don't, they are not officially one of us.
Right. They're not, yeah. Did you, so we were talking a little bit before we went on the air about how, there hasn't been a lot of actual like scholarly research to sort of try and define the secular community and describe it, in a way that is somewhat accurate and reliable. And that sort of work is kind of just now starting to happen, at least in terms of like looking at inside the community and sort of breaking it down. Because you mentioned the survey you did, and what was 2009, that was the one that was that one of the ones that is with the number that is cited a lot of how that we atheists I guess we use it as bragging rights. So like, there's more of us than you thought there were, and we're the fastest growing demographic and demographic of religious belief in the United States. And but there hasn't been a whole lot in terms of the actual composition of secular people themselves. And I was reading over the report for the Secular Voices survey over the last couple of days in anticipation of this. And as a regular sort of person who identifies as an atheist and is still sort of somewhat connected to and interested in the atheist / secular, skeptical, whatever you want to call it, community, there were things in it, there were results of the survey that I found quite heartening and quite surprising in a very not like shocking or anything. There wasn't anything in it but things that were sort of a little bit surprising in a very encouraging way. Like the fact that there does seem to be some actual evidence that secular folks overall seem a little bit more progressive than the general population. And it's not usually extremely so, but by a few percentage points, and with certain issues by a lot. But with it seems like generally speaking, just there's a little bit of secular folks are slightly more progressive than the general part, and that was nice. Like, were there things like that in the results that that you found surprising, or that confirmed what you and your colleagues kind of suspected? Or
yeah, so for a while, and going back a little bit to the earlier point, I think there's now a generation of scholars that is coming of a scholarly age, so to speak. Either that they're getting tenured and have more freedom to do whatever they want, or that have come up mentored by older scholars that have done this kind of work from a secular perspective, and so they have a little bit more leeway to navigate. And so there's some stuff, especially in sociology and psychology, that has come up about the sociology and psychology of atheism in particular. There's a lot of scholarship coming out there. Now there's 2 journals where people, like, they're openly only for, literature on secularism.
Yeah.
So that has been a lag, mostly because of the structures haven't been there. I mean, it's essentially like public universities are secular just because they're state universities and whatnot, but not necessarily. So they're not denominational, but that doesn't mean that secularism is a line of inquiry in their departments. In the case, I'm more interested in political research because my training as a political scientist, and that there's less there. And in the case of the Secular Voices survey that we did last year with my consulting firm, Socioanalytica Research, which is the second year we do it. The only difference, this one, we also, in the last one in 2020, we decided to use a national survey. So instead of just interviewing secular people, like, we just had a national sample and we moved a subset of questions to secular people or people who identified as non-religious. Because one of the interesting things, now that you mentioned something that surprised me, was that most secular people do not identify as secular.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I was going to talk about that too, in the listing of the terms that they feel apply to them. Some of that was really interesting. Yeah.
So that's the way that's how it was a little different from the one in 2019 that we did. But you're right. In terms of politically speaking, usually non-religious folk are to the left of anyone else in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, like, but the problem is usually you don't have enough sample size to measure this. But I mean, I would say, like, probably Jewish Americans and the non-religious are usually, like, kind of like toward those to the left of liberals, so to speak.
Right.
So if you have, like, positions that are particularly popular right now, liberal positions are particularly popular, like increasing the minimum wage or taxing rich people and whatnot, you always have, like, a large population support, and then, like, the non-religious you're gonna add something to that. And then you have other positions, like on social issues. It's quite interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I was giving a talk at Prairie State Humanist in Chicagoland, virtual, of course. And I've been mentioning that, for example, in the case of same-sex marriage, when I was back in PRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, in 2013, we did a study looking at public opinion on same-sex marriage since Massachusetts adopted same-sex marriage in 2002. And in 2003, when the kind of like the first kind of survey that starts measuring consistently support for same-sex marriage, mostly because before that it was essentially civil unions, what was being measured in public opinion. But in 2003, Pew found that about a third of Americans were in favor of same-sex marriage, and 2/3 of non-religious people were in favor of same-sex marriage. So it was a kind of the only religious group, so to speak, that was in favor, majority.
Yeah.
By 2013, that was the year in which, like, we recorded the first time that same-sex marriage was supported by the majority of Americans. We found 53% in that year. But by that time, 3/4 of non-religious folk were already in favor of same-sex marriage. And so I think even though the political power of the non-religious, it's certainly not very visible. I mean, in terms of elected officials being openly non-religious, I think there's a cultural factor that we haven't talked about much, and it's the fact that public opinion in the United States have been moving more liberal, and people talk about young people
Mhm.
essentially more liberal, and it makes sense. A lot of like millennial generation and younger, are suffering some economic setbacks that previous generations didn't have. And but the non-religious, in particular, of that population, who is actually also in many ways responsible for that secular boom that we have seen in the last like nearly 15 years now.
Yeah.
They're to the left of that, and so what we're so in that sense, the public opinion, the non-religious have been shaping public opinion in many ways that we don't tend to acknowledge or even realize. A few years back, I wrote a chapter in a book. I think was edited by Phil Zuckerman and John Shook, and I was at that point. Gallup has had found that the self-identification of liberal, ideological label liberal, had been increasing over the last few years, and it's been increasing. People who identify as liberal has been increasing, but it still is not even close to people identify as moderate or conservative.
Right.
But essentially, like my analysis showed that most of that increase was because the non-religious are the biggest chunk of people who identify as liberals, and as more non-religious people continue identifying as liberal, that's essentially what's driving that. And so I don't think we understand very well yet how, at least at a larger cultural level, driving the political discussion, as people who understand, who are looking at public opinion, and Americans think that a lot of those or those shifts have been thanks to non-religious people actually, driving a lot of these more liberal positions in public opinion surveys.
Yeah. And by the way, for anybody watching who wants to check out this survey that we're talking about, you can go to secularvoicessurvey.com and read the survey, the 2020 Secular Voices survey that we're talking about. And do we know anything about why secular people tend to be more to the left? Is because the assumption would be that a lot of the definitive sort of positions of conservatism are not universally, obviously, because there are secular conservatives, but that they're sort of tied to religious belief. Like the opposition to same-sex marriage, for example. The perception is that the really hardcore opposition to that was driven by conservative, sort of right-wing religious people who followed a very fundamentalist, homophobic version of their in the United States, typically Christianity, and so that secular people not subscribing to religion would be less likely to hold that view. Do we have any actual data to back that up, or is that just an assumption?
I think it's an assumption, and I think to some extent is true. There's some research showing that a lot of the growth of secularism has to do with people being turned off by the political tone of the religious right. That doesn't explain it fully, because even if you were turned off by the right-wing religion, why don't you move from being like an evangelical to an Episcopalian, or
right,
or the fact that a lot of the people who are leaving religion are coming from more either mainstream liberal churches, or like what it's called the mainline, kind of like Episcopalians and
Methodist,
and the Methodists,
yeah,
and the like, and then also coming from like more ethnic churches like Catholics. As a former Catholic, I have my.
I like the quotes. A former Catholic.
I was baptized, I guess.
Right. So, but you never had like you were never like a sincere sort of devout practicing Catholic. It was just sort of the label you were born with, so to speak.
Yes, and then like I went to a Catholic high school,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
but I never really felt comfortable uh, in it.
Yeah.
And not with personal experiences, like, I was never like an altar boy or anything like that. That I had never that level of contact with the church, but just in general, um, there's a thing about which probably made me study political science. Like I have a thing with authority.
Yeah.
Like divine authority is not something that I ever kind of bought.
Right.
Um, but going back to the point of this, I think there's some reaction to to how religious people, and especially like the positions that the Christian right have been taking. But I don't think that explains everything. Mostly because like we still have agency. I mean, we could still there could be reasons for why a secular person would not be in favor of same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with secular authority. And I've seen those. Like I gave a talk like 10 years ago where some guy came like, like I'm opposed to same-sex marriage. I was talking about these numbers actually.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm opposed to these because like, biology.
Yeah.
Like, it's a man, it's a dude and a woman, and like, and it's like, okay. So yeah, so there are some secular
Yeah.
rationalizations you can use for that. Now, but I think there's a more there's a somehow I wouldn't say a libertarian streak because that can be taken too far. I get asked a lot about libertarians in the secular movement, and yeah, I think secular movement people tend to be more libertarian than, or at least identify as libertarian to a higher level than probably any other group. But still, like the biggest chunk have like very like liberal big government sympathies.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with, if we look at economics, I think a lot of it has to do with, a lot of churches will talk about charity and whatnot, and I think a lot of secular people will have a more rational view of it and say like, why can't the state manage all these social services instead of like outsourcing them to charity essentially. And yeah, and a view of you also don't have that view. And again, like we got to remember that not all non-religious people are atheists,
Right.
but I think most non-religious people are atheist adjacent. And that means that just depending on how you ask the question, you would have like between 40 and between maybe 30 and 40% of the community of the larger non-religious demographic who would be openly atheist or agnostic. But I think of that other chunk, that it may be 60 to 70%, you have a large portion of people who don't really think about God.
Yeah.
You may ask them like, yeah, sure, there's something out there, or yeah, I believe in God, but do they think that God actively gets involved in the world and listens to prayers? That number starts dropping dramatically. So we need to be careful how we use the language and how we define these terms. But what I'm getting at is that a lot of people in the community, even if they're not openly atheists or agnostics, they don't really believe in divine providence, even if there's a God, and that in that sense, the government should provide some sort of level, like baseline level of living in which people don't fall through the cracks. And I think that's where a lot of particularly economic policies come, why a lot of secular people show up as very liberal and kind of statist in their economic views.
Right. The idea that we need to be taking care of ourselves. Like we have a responsibility to each other because there is no higher power that's going to take care
Yeah.
of us.
It's a very humanist position,
Yeah.
even if people are not aware that they're humanists.
Yeah. Oh, that you know, and that was one of the results of the of the survey that I was, you know, one of the ones, because I, like, as I said, I don't think there was anything in it that shocked me, but it was just sort of pleasantly surprising. Is that not just what you just said, that the by far the largest group, I think it was almost 2/3 of the people who described themselves as secular, or would fall into the secular category, not even necessarily describe themselves as secular, but just fall into the secular non-religious category. Almost 2/3 of them, I think, did not identify as either atheist or agnostic. They were just sort of generically non-religious.
Yeah, and that has to do with, again, how you ask.
Yeah.
So I kind of like did a modified Pew survey question, in which like you have a list of religious problems, like the Pew. They want to measure denominations, so they go really into the weeds. I'm not interested in like if you're an American Baptist or a Southern Baptist.
Right.
I'm interested if you're a Protestant.
Right.
So it was a modified Pew. And then they have these questions that, you know, at the bottom is like atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. And so in our case, it's atheist, agnostic, and nothing in particular who are the knowns. But a lot of the people who identify as atheists, I mean, all of the people essentially who identify as atheists and agnostic as their religion, usually in their beliefs are pretty consistent. Usually get like, you know, the odd response in there, but generally it's pretty consistent. But yeah, in that sense, like most of the people are nothing in particulars, then atheist, agnostic. And then when you ask about beliefs, then like the scales start shifting. And then like kind of you get double the size of that group, becomes like kind of 40%-ish. Those who are atheist, agnostic by belief.
Yeah. The end of the people, there's I guess the way it was done was people were given like a list of terms that sort of refer to being secular or being non-religious, and were asked which of these applies to you. And I was kind of, again, as something that was just sort of a mild surprise. Agnostic was the most commonly chosen term. Agnostic and atheist were both I think agnostic was 84%. 84% of people said agnostic.
No. So there is so the chart actually.
Yeah.
So there are four bars. There's one that identifies all people who are in the secular cohort.
Right.
And then people who identify as Gnostic, atheist, and not religious in that particular question of identification.
Right.
So yeah, the people who are atheist and agnostic are particularly consistent with how they identify themselves. But the most common among all knowns was spiritual but not religious.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Which it was actually 36% of agnostics called themselves spiritual but not religious, and 14% of atheists. So, you know, this is not, you know, these labels are, you know, it's kind of like how people, and they could choose different labels, like so they weren't limited to one.
Right.
So all these identities are overlapping. But it, you know, a lot of it makes sense. Like, so atheists are less likely to identify spiritual but not religious, but that still means that some atheists do. And most of the people who are not religious but also don't identify as atheists or agnostics are spiritual but not religious, but not all of them. And you know, but again, like the most interesting part was that the secular was the bottom one. Which
yeah.
only 9% of secular people identify as secular. Although 28% of atheists do. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of that also comes down to how each individual respondent interprets those terms, you know.
Yes.
Because like the way I view it, and I guess when I talk about secularism, like at least when I talk about it in a political sense, like that can include religious people. I mean, to me, secularism just in that sense, just means having a society, and specifically having a government and sort of a political apparatus that doesn't favor any particular religion, and doesn't favor religion over non-religion. Like, that to me is secularism. And so someone could be a religious person, and many religious people do, as we mentioned before, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. A lot of people who identify as some religious category or another support that kind of secularism, um, but don't identify as an atheist or an agnostic or any non-religious category. So a lot of it also is probably dependent on how you understand the term.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, like secular is not an exclusive term of non-religious people,
Right.
Although we tend to use it more often than others. So I think we can claim some ownership.
Well, yeah, and I guess there's in the terms of like secular humanism, like those two go together. Those two words go together pretty naturally to form the term. That was always, because I grew up, and I had like sort of a voyeuristic fascination with the Trinity Broadcast Network, and also with Fox News. And I grew out of that. Like, the older I get, the less patience I have for any of that. But I used to sort of watch it to get like this window into what people who had very different worldviews than I had were sort of what they were receiving and what was sort of influencing them. And boy, secular humanism, that was the
Oh,
scare. That was the
that's
scare
the
word.
scariest thing.
Yeah. Oh, John Hagee going on about secular humanists. It's like, oh boy, they don't like that.
It's kind of funny because in like 2002, 2004-ish, I would go, I would watch two things before I went to bed. I would watch the 700 Club and then the Daily Show to balance it out.
I mean, that would do it.
And Pat Robertson's still on TV, man.
Oh, I saw him. Sometimes I forget that he's not only still alive, but that he's still on TV. And I think the last time I saw him was a couple of weeks ago. And when he was saying, like, he finally sort of threw in the towel on the Trump thing and was like, okay, Biden won. It's time that we all admit it. And the president, Trump is just being silly now, like trying to drag this out. And I thought, boy, when you lose Pat Robertson, like, that's pretty much, now it's pretty much over.
Yeah, but the thing with Pat Robertson is he may be crazy, but I mean he's one of the smartest operatives in there, and just one last thing, and then we close this. But I think a lot of the things that has happened in this, Trump years, that are at least administratively over, it's that a lot of the people, if you look at Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, like they grew up in the movement. And so back in the day, like let's say the 70s, 80s, even the 90s, like you left the crazy part quiet because you wanted to blend in. And now these networks have become so homogeneous that like you can you essentially give you don't have your stump speech, you give it everywhere, because like you think all the audiences like react the same, and the one who don't react the same, then like they're the enemy. Even though, and I think to me that's, which also reminds me of the all these scandals with the Catholic Church, which is like how the bishops talk is like, dudes, like you need to get out a little bit more, because this is not how you sound crazy and people don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I like to describe it as the people who are some of the loudest voices on the right today, the people who were probably among those who showed up at the Capitol on the 6th and did their little attempted coup, and the people who sort of incited them to do that, other than the then president, um, you know, people like Alex Jones and all of those guys, like they're not new. Like they've been around for as long as I've been paying attention to politics, which I mean, I started paying attention to politics when I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. So, and I'm 40 now. So it's back in at least since the early 90s, and well before that as well. It's just that, like you said, the mainstream politicians used to keep the crazy part quiet because they didn't want to turn off their base, or they didn't want to turn off the mainstream voters. And now, like, there are people with internet platforms and audiences in the hundreds of thousands or millions saying the kind of stuff that when I was a kid was only said in, like, mimeographed newsletters and self-published books that you could only buy on the spinner rack at a truck stop. And now people saying those same things are reaching millions and millions of people. And it's not turning out so well for for society as a whole, I don't think. But
yeah,
yeah,
it's but again, it's this evolution has been, I mean, sad and amazing to watch as a political scientist.
Oh, I'm sure.
This is like a train wreck, like, and you can, you want to turn away, but you're like, I want to see if what I predict is going to happen next is happening next. So you have that sense of impending doom, and then, like, am I right about the impending doom? How right am I about the impending doom?
Yeah, it's I mean, like, and the impression that a lot of it is, especially like the more recent events and Trump sort of refusing to accept the election result, and a lot of it is just sort of chickens coming home to roost, because the Republican Party and the right wing in general in this country has been sort of moving in that direction for a long, long time, and it's only relatively recently that those voices have gained enough mainstream traction that things have actually started to happen, that the rest of us have noticed. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure as a political scientist, it's fascinating, and you can sort of look at it, with some professional detachment and say, let's look at this as a phenomenon to study. As a non-political scientist, it's like I alternate wildly between being incredibly amused and absolutely terrified.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect in here is that I don't think Americans understand how even in the like the United States reputation in the world is not very good. I think it's at the lowest it has been.
Yeah.
But still very influential, and in ways that we don't really we cannot fathom. And I remember listening or reading also in 2016, like these like teenager farms in like Moldova or something, that they were like doing the trolling in Facebook for
yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't understand, like, American, I didn't grow up in the continental United States. I grew up in Puerto Rico. And so, and, in school, I have a lot of friends from Latin America and whatnot. And, the penetration of American media, US media and movies, and like, it's so big that the rest of the world understands the United States better than the United States understands the world.
Yeah.
And so and when I read those stories about, like, all these trolling farms that are mimicking Americans, are pretending that that they pass as Americans with language and like phrases and whatnot, it's because, like, the cultural penetration of America around the world is so big that you can actually pretend to be an American and probably pass along in if not many questions are asked. But in that even regard, I remember in the 90s and 2000s, as the evangelical movement. I want to get it back to this
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
A lot of the growth of evangelical churches in many places, especially in Latin America, and where I grew up in Puerto Rico, definitely it's like kind of like the hotbed of it. Or it was, there was a lot of missionaries and missions from like evangelical churches in the U.S.
Hmm.
Or if they were not physically doing the mission work, they were certainly bankrolling it. And I remember in the 90s and early 2000s, like all these discussions, scholarly discussions about whether like Latin America, who in many countries were starting to democratize and moving away from dictatorships, that this influence of American evangelicals was going to be a democratizing force in those countries, uh, because they were used to the American system of elections and respected democracy. And I was like,
Right.
eh, yeah, I think they're just playing the game, but I don't think they like it that much.
Right.
And man, like, was I right? Uh,
Yeah. As soon
and
as
we're seeing it like in Brazil, and especially in Brazil, where like these brand of like overly materialistic evangelicalism has taken ground. We have like one of the preeminent right wingers of the region, and there's strong movements in other countries in particular, but I think Brazil, which is the kind of like the poster boy of evangelicalism in Latin America, has shown us that that evangelical influence is certainly not very pro-democratic.
no, there is. I mean, you know, I'm usually pretty careful about sort of lumping religious people as a group in with like authoritarianism, and because like I know a lot of times atheists, especially back in the day when I was more involved in the sort of what we used to call the great debate community, there was sort of a lot of painting with a broad brush of religious folks and saying like, oh well, they believe in a divine, like Christopher Hitchens used to say, it's like it's celestial North Korea, you know and not all religious folks are like that, or see or view the world in that way, or but I mean, there is a certain sort of harmony between, like, especially sort of far right conservative fundamentalist forms of religion and authoritarian forms of government, because that's that lines up very closely with how they think, I guess, that the universe is arranged. And if God is the dictator of the universe, well, why shouldn't one of God's people be the dictator of our country? You can see
But just
how,
of your country, because it's also very nationalistic.
yeah.
Otherwise, we get into world governments and Satan is there.
Oh, that's true. That boy, that oh yeah, isn't that we can have a Christian dictatorship of a country,
Yeah,
but not of one nation state, or of all the isolated nation states, as long as they don't work together to form some kind of global government.
yeah.
That's
Then that's the
bad.
Antichrist.
That's the Antichrist. Yeah. Oh man, I never thought of that until just now, but that is absolutely brilliant. The Christian nationalism is fine. Christian globalism, oh no, that's Satanism.
Yeah,
I guess unless Jesus comes back, and then he can be like, no, I'm in charge of all this.
yeah,
You know. By the way, so we're in the last 10 minutes or so,
sure.
and if anybody watching in the live chat has questions um, that you'd like to ask Dr. Navarro-Rivera, we will entertain questions from the live chat. If you guys can pay attention to what we're actually talking about instead of arguing about stuff we're not even talking about. I've been glancing at the live chat here and there,
I
and
have
I'm just like, why?
I don't
What?
know where the live chat is.
It's
So
it's on the YouTube page. But
okay.
oh, okay, and I'll read you the question. Okay, so Dana has a question. Ask your question, Dana. Um, I think I know what Dana's going to ask. But anyway, yeah, there was an argument in the live chat. I didn't catch all of it because I was mostly doing this.
Yeah.
But they were arguing about shit that we're not even talking about, and that's always nice when you host a show. And,
Okay.
and there are people in the live chat that are just going off on their own conversation. It's like, it's nothing to do with secularism or politics or anything.
So
But
we got the question, or
I'm still waiting for the question. Dana said she
oh,
had a question, and she hasn't posted the question yet.
okay.
You're letting me down. Okay, here it is. Oh, she says she's working on it. Okay.
Okay.
Do you know of any online communities that are more sort of oriented toward the curious or the agnostic as opposed to the sort of, identifying more strongly as an atheist?
I know of one I'm less involved now, but it's still around. So it's the Secular Latino Alliance. They're a Facebook group, and they have pretty good moderators, and so they're pretty sincere in the fact that if you go there like with curiosity about atheism, secularism, and then you're pretty welcome. They have kicked out people for like being nasty to people who are sincerely. So they have kicked out hardcore atheists for like being not nice to people who are sincerely like asking questions about,
Yeah.
not being religious. But other than that, I don't know. I'm assuming that some sociologists who may be doing online atheism research probably know more about that. That's not kind of like what I do. But I know that at least that community exists, and I doubt that is the only one out there.
It's interesting that people who identify themselves primarily as agnostic don't seem to have nearly as loud of a presence in the overall community, at least in my experience, as people who identify as atheists, or as maybe people who feel a lot more confident toward one side of the question than the other. I know, because Dana and I are friends, and I know that like wanting to be interested in and to engage with other sort of secular minded people, but not identifying strongly as an atheist, I know is kind of a problem for some folks. There's another question. There's a couple more questions.
Sure.
This is from E.R. Mixon's Craziest Theories. Do you think that part of the reason that people identify more as non-religious is because atheism seems like a religion to people, as a belief in no God?
I don't doubt that some people may think about that way. I mean, but there are two things going on. One is that most people don't identify as atheists. You have a lot of people who don't identify as atheists who have atheistic beliefs or lack of them. I think the way Pew asks the question basically labels atheism as a religion. So what you get, the people who say they're atheists as a religion are usually more kind of like activist types. So you will get, like, for example, the question, we ask a question in the Secular Voices survey about whether you have been ever a member of any of these groups. And membership is, so any of these groups are like AHA, CFI, FFRF, which is the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and like 7 or 8 others. And so the people who identify as atheists as a religion or agnostic as a religion are more likely to be on those groups. And yeah, it may be that a lot of people who say, like, who don't identify atheists as a religion think that maybe other people who identify as that, like atheism becomes its own religion by that virtue. Or in my case, that I've said, if I ever get one of these surveys, I wouldn't be a nothing in particular, because I am an atheist, but I'm an atheist on belief. I'm not an atheist in religion, because I don't think atheism is a religion. But I don't doubt that there's some people. I mean, a lot of the problems with public opinion is that, you're trying to capture a lot of data and do interpretations, but if you start asking individually like what they think, like, I mean, you can do that, like if you do a survey of maybe 50 people and kind of like, but I mean, you can't do it with 2,000.
Right.
It becomes like, I mean, even with modern techniques of like, data parsing and text reading, still a lot.
Yeah. You get so many different responses. Yeah. This is a question from Loretta Reyes, who says, I'm not exactly sure where Loretta's going with this, but can the Humanist Association be considered a church/religious organization to get the tax exempt status?
That is actually a legal debate that has happened in different secular organizations. AHA doesn't. It's opposed to that. But for example, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting now the Satanic Temple.
Oh yeah.
For example, it does get it has in many ways it's an organization, it's a church created for the purpose of like fighting these kind of things,
right?
Or like not necessarily fighting, but like raising awareness of the absurdity of many of these things. And then there's other like organizations that are more like, I wouldn't say atheistic, but certainly humanistically oriented, like ethical societies.
Mm-hmm.
The American Ethical Union, where like many of their members are non-theistic. So it's kind of like a humanistic religion, and they do get like these tax benefits and like, they get clergy benefits. And so, that's a debate in the community, depending on like where you sit and on the separation of church and state, and whether and where you sit on that pluralistic side. And I know many humanistic clergy people, ethical leaders, or even Unitarian Universalist clergy who are non-believers themselves, and humanist chaplains. So that could happen. So yes, the short answer is yes. Like there's organizations who are humanistically oriented who actually do that kind of thing, but AHA, for example, doesn't.
Right. This is a question from Lisa Garrison, who says, why are there atheistic strains of Buddhism, Judaism, Shinto, and other religions, but no purely cultural forms of Christianity or Islam?
I think it mostly had to do because a lot of those traditions are not necessarily theistic. Mm-hmm. And so you can practice a lot of these religions without having necessarily to believe in a particular dude whose name is Yahweh, literally.
Yeah.
And so it does lend themselves more for a secular practice. And then you have even humanistic Judaism. So you have like my mentor Barry Kosmin, who does a lot of done a lot of research on what is Jews by religion and Jews by culture. People who were raised in Jewish traditions, but are not necessarily practicing Jews, or at least believing Jews. And so yeah, some traditions more than others, but I think Christianity, and again, like I'm not an expert in theology, but my experience living in a mostly Christian society is that it's not very easy to oh my gosh, I forgot the word I was going to use, to reconcile the lack of belief in God with and if you're interested in again, like you churches and ethical societies are kind of like that, which they kind of work as they have services and they have like their rituals and their routines, mm-hmm. But many of them are either vaguely theistic or openly humanist. Yeah. but they're not kind of like mainstream. Uh,
Yeah. And what I think also a lot of like
and
I
they're not Christian. Sorry, they're
no,
also
yeah.
not
Well,
Christian.
and but as far as like secular like an atheistic version of Christianity, like there's not like an organized, atheistic Christian church or anything, but there are a lot of atheists or non-religious people that still partake in Christian traditions because it's been so influential in our culture that, like I mean Christmas, like I celebrate Christmas. I don't believe in the religious version of the story. I don't believe that there was a baby Jesus, or if there was, I don't believe that he was the son of God or anything like that. But it's a cultural thing. I put up a Christmas tree. When I was a kid, my parents, you know, encouraged us to believe in Santa Claus, and we sang Christmas carols. And there are secular, trappings to it, or there are really some religious trappings to it, but it's mostly a secular celebration. And I think a lot of people do things like that are sort of that have their roots or are closely associated with Christianity, but the actual celebration of them isn't tied to any sort of belief in God or any sort of and any acceptance of the religious stories that kind of underpin them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This or last year, well, actually last and this year was the first time ever since I've lived alone or with my wife that we had a Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because my kid wanted one, but he don't even know who the heck Jesus is.
Right.
Like he likes the presents part
Of course
and
he
the tree.
does.
He likes the
Yeah.
tree and the presents part, but he has no idea who Jesus is or the Virgin Mary or anybody
Right.
like that. We haven't had that conversation. I mean, he only sees one Jesus like that. You saw the movie Dogma,
Oh
1990.
yes, the buddy Jesus.
I have a buddy Jesus in my
Buddy Christ,
office.
yes.
Yeah, the buddy Christ. So yeah, I have a buddy Christ figurine. That's the only Jesus he knows.
Oh, he's probably the best one anyway. Either him or Willem Dafoe from Last Temptation. You know. Okay, last question, and this one, this kind of ties back into another thing from the Secular Voices survey that I was glad to see, which is that secular people are more likely to be positive towards transgender issues. And the question from Jordan Joan P is uh, how would, and the question is phrased how would, but I know the AHA does stuff like this. So how would the AHA help and support trans and non-binary people?
Yes. So it has. So we have our alliances. So we have our social justice alliances that we call them. We have the LGBTQ alliance, the Black Humanist Alliance, Black Humanist Alliance, Feminist Humanist Alliance, and the Latinx Humanist Alliance. I'm currently the co-chair of the Latinx Humanist Alliance. And so we have done, as an organization, the LGBTQ Humanist Alliance have organized for the last 2 years the Centering the Margins conference, which like they bring LGBTQ voices and of different members of the community talking about issues in the community. We belong to different coalitions that are trying to bring issues of justice and to transgender people in particular. So there's some work. The interesting part of I would say of being in the woods of the secular community is that a lot of the work that it's done day to day is not very well known because it's not very. It doesn't grab attention like winning a court case or losing one. Mm-hmm. So the day-to-day work of organizing, building coalitions, belonging to coalitions, it doesn't get as much as attention. So I would say go to the LGBTQ Alliance, Humanist Alliance, and I don't remember the website, but I think it's in the if you look at the AHA website, it should be there. And get in touch with us or get in touch with me afterwards. DM me at Twitter at JuhemNR, JUHEMNR, and I'll put you in contact. But yeah, we do we do have these different activities and different organizations. And the other thing is that one thing that we didn't discuss much was demographics,
Mhm.
which I do all the time in other settings. But you know, LGBTQ people are especially the demographic that is most likely to be non-religious for various reasons. But
Mhm.
and that doesn't get stressed that much, mostly because the numbers are small in surveys. So when you get a survey that large, people are more interested in highlighting other aspects.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're an important part of this community, an important part of the growth of the community, and yeah, like they're also, as I said before at the beginning, like non-religious people were ahead of their time looking at same-sex marriage, and yeah, they're ahead of their time on trans issues as well, more supportive than other groups in the country.
Yeah.
There's still work to them.
Obviously, but that is one of the things that that makes me very, very not just comfortable, but proud to support the AHA is that it makes a point of reaching out to marginalized groups and uh, of doing social justice work and raising awareness of LGBTQ issues and racial justice issues within the context of secularism, but also, obviously there are problems, that affect all of society, and giving people who aren't, as I described myself when we were talking earlier, people who aren't just dopey white guys, voices in the community, which I think is something that is starting to happen more, and is so long overdue. To be able to amplify the voices of not only people of color, but LGBTQ people and people who belong to who identify with any number of marginalized identities, and giving them more of a voice and more of a place in the secular movement is fantastic, and something that I think is so important and so needed. And I'm so happy to support the AHA as a part of what it does is to do stuff like that. It's wonderful. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for being here. And for everybody who's been watching, secularvoicessurvey.com is where you can go to read the report on this Secular Voices survey that we've been talking about for most of the hour. And you pitched your Twitter a second ago. Are there other places that people can go to find out more about you?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to @Socioanalytica in Twitter and Instagram. I need to get that Instagram account going, but I mean, we do put charts in there, and @Socioanalytica, and if you have it behind me here, Socioanalytica, that's how you write it, SOCIOANALITICA. And we also are in Facebook, but my own personal social media that's only active is Twitter. So
Yeah.
that's Juhem Navarro-Rivera.
Yeah, and that is linked or in the video description as well. So yeah, thank you so much for being here and hanging out with me and talking about and good luck on your ongoing research, which I'm looking forward to seeing more of in the coming months and years, because God, it's so overdue that we, something that we said, again, I think before we went on the air, that for as much as interested as we secular folks say we are in science, we haven't really turned the power of the social sciences to learn more about our own group, which is too bad. But hopefully that's gonna continue to change.
Well, thank you for hosting me, and thank you all your audience for listening and asking those very, very good questions.
All right, thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Bye.